Mark Curry has always been a talented cricketer, and in 1990 he showed his full array of batting and bowling skills. Apart from great performances at district level and in the Tooheys Country Cup throughout New South Wales, Mark turned in a blinder at the Prudential National Country Championships in Bendigo. He batted 5 times for 3 not-outs, an aggregate of 239 runs at an average of 119.5. Mark's highest score was 68 against the ACT. And with the ball he was also impressive, bowling 97.5 overs, which included 24 maidens, and took 14 wickets for 251 runs at 17.93 apiece. For his effort, he was named the Australian Country Cricketer of the Year, and continued good form saw him called up to the New South Wales Sheffield Shield squad. Another willow wilder who had a super year was female cricketer Sally Griffiths. In January, Sally helped New South Wales win the Australian Championships, and she also won the Player of the Series at that carnival. She was chosen to tour New Zealand with the Australian team. In the first test, Sally set about rewriting the record books, making her maiden test century with 133 and figuring in a world record 7th wicket partnership with Debbie Wilson of 183. Sally was also picked in the Australian indoor cricket team, capping a fine year indeed. Defending Sports Star of the Year champion Chris Lawrence has again sailed his way into contention with strong international performances. Chris started the year with wins in the course racing, slalom and marathon events at the World Windsurfing Championships on Belmont Bay, giving Chris the overall lightweight title. Then he tripped overseas to take on the best in the Formula 1 of sailboarding, the World Mistral Championships. And for the second year in a row, the lad from Lisarow on the Central Coast came home victorious as the overall world champ.
A familiar tragedy on the Pacific Highway, this time 15 kilometres north of Raymond Terrace. Eyewitnesses say the Toyota Corolla driven by Mrs. Restevsky was travelling north in an overtaking lane when she veered into the path of an oncoming semi-trailer.
She looked like she was leaning down trying to fix the radio. Then all of a sudden she just veered 2 foot over the lines and she hit the spare tyre underneath the truck, which pushed it further in underneath the truck, and then she went underneath the back wheels.
The front side of the car was crushed on impact, killing the driver, spinning the vehicle out of control onto the other side of the road. Incredibly, passing traffic dodged the wreckage. The semi-driver suffered minor shock, with the only damage to his vehicle being to the rear axle and wheel rims. Rescue workers closed the highway for more than half an hour as the woman's body was cut from the wreckage. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
You're looking at a $1 million grease and oil change. Proudly wheeled out of the Marlin Truck Body Workshop in Carrington today, it's the latest development for refuelling and servicing mined vehicles. For an industry that works around the clock, delays for vehicle maintenance are costly. In the past, giant dump trucks like these have had to retreat from their work at the coalface to be serviced or refuelled. Now such necessities can be brought to them. 2 trucks can be hooked up to the tanker at once. It carries 10,000 litres of distillate, along with thousands of litres of grease, oil, air and water. Self-sealing nozzles attached to other vehicles disgorge their used oil into storage tanks, then replenish them with fresh supplies. An array of hydraulic pumps streamline the operation. The unique vehicle comes complete with a kitchen sink. Its 2-metre high wheels inched it on board a low loader for the trip to the Drayton open cut mine near Muswellbrook, where it will soon be servicing a fleet of 45 giant trucks.
These shiny red vegetables are almost a tradition on the Australian summer salad. The tomato is this country's second most popular vegetable behind the potato. But surveys show consumption is falling dramatically from 19 kilos per person per year in 1981 to just 16 kilos in 1990. Scientist Dr. Vong Nguyen, working in his laboratory at the Department of Agriculture, is trying to stop the rot. With the perfect breed of tomato, firm, full of flavour and, most importantly, long-living.
What we want to do for the farmers here is we want to improve their life.
This 12-month-old Rin tomato from Central America is the father of the success. The Rins simply do not rot, and crossed with the conventional Australian tomatoes, they've become a radical new breed of commercial crop. Dr Nguyen calls them the red centres, a tomato with a 40-day shelf life. That's compared with a 28-day life for the common red. Normally, commercial tomatoes are picked green to ensure a longer transport and shelf life. Often the vegetables are ripened artificially using a special gas. The red centre, however, with its extra shelf life, can be ripened on the vine. And that means a peak of flavour.
Magic. Beautiful.
Saving the flavour and almost doubling the shelf life is a radical boost for the $115 million industry. Seeds are now being commercially produced for the red centre, but Dr Nguyen and his team aren't stopping in their search for the perfect red.
We're on way, not happy with what we have, but we have to improve, all the time.
Not since 1984 has such an illustrious band of sidecar drivers and their passengers graced the oval track in Newcastle, and they have come from every corner of the continent to try and wrest the championship trophies from the holders.
It's the best in 10 years that I can remember. The blokes from the west, from the south, north, Northern Territory, west, everywhere, they're terrific. The blokes you see in practice here now, they're foxing a bit. Come Friday and Saturday night, it's going to be on for young and old.
Today, an official practice session, along with the scrutineering of the 1,000 and 1,100cc machines that are deceptively quick around a track that was described later as brilliant. An interesting competitor and breaking down the hallowed halls of a male-dominated sport is the current Western Australian champ Helen Membry, who is Ed Blakeney's passenger, and she lays the blame fairly and squarely with her brother.
My husband went away on a month's holiday. My brother took me down to the track, and I thought, that looks good, I'd like to have a go on that. Went out for a lap, came in and I was hooked.
Did you ever think you're going to be competing in an Australian championship so soon after taking it up?
No way. Ed asked me how far I'd like to go, and I said I'd like to finish a race virtually. And here we are after winning the state title. We're over here going for the national.
For defending champion Shane Suter of Victoria, 1990 was a season he would rather forget, but he's not letting the pressure get to him.
It's not really worrying me. I don't really think there is. There was last year after the title, there was a lot of pressure on to perform every meeting, but I've sort of come accustomed to that.
All the state champions are here for the titles, and it's up to Phil McCurtain and Darren Treloar to try and give us a hometown victory.
We're here to keep them honest, but of course, we feel we can beat the interstaters. We've been lacking a bit of competition here this year. We've only had about 4 or 5 meetings, but we'll be in there. We'll be in there fighting for New South Wales.
Formerly known as the Penfolds Classic, the Coca-Cola race to be run at Broadmeadow on February the 26th has attracted the superstar 2-year-olds from New South Wales, and a Windward Orbit guarantee the victor are starting this year's Golden Slipper Stakes at Rose Hill. Silver Slipper winner Honeybee Quick heads the list, with Max Lee's train Nisha's Lane, Marskin, Shade, Nitrogen, Prime Flight and Swire Hill also nominated. But the standout is the impressive Sydney filly Cloudlet, who was all the rage at Rose Hill on December the 15th. She backed that up by showing a clean pair of hills at Warwick Farm on the 29th. The prestigious race has provided 2 former Golden Slipper winners, Riesling in 1964 and Marauding in 1987.
On Wednesday, NBN News highlighted the annual problem of water contamination in the Williams River, which had been worsened by the unusually dry conditions.
Fishermen have noticed a slimy substance blooming along the river from south of Dungog through to Seaham. The scientists call it blue-green algae, and in the hot, dry and still conditions, it multiplies to unsafe levels.
At that stage, the Water Board was carrying out tests. Today it confirmed the worst fears of those living along the river. The concentration of algae is so great between Seaham Weir and Clarence Town that toxins produced by the marine plant life are strong enough to cause eye and skin irritations in swimmers. The more serious risk is to stock, which the Water Board has advised should not be allowed to drink from the contaminated stretch. And they warn that the boiling of water will not kill the toxins, which could cause gastrointestinal complaints in humans.
The picking will continue for the next 8 weeks with harvesting around the clock at some vineyards. "1990 was a tough time with heavy rains restricting tonnages, and figures from the Winemakers Federation of Australia show a consumer cutback from 21 litres per person in the mid-80s to just 18 litres last year. Wyndham Estates' Brian McGuigan admits the industry is caught in the Australia-wide recession, but he says consumers will still buy at the right price.
We've put psychologically a barrier on the $10 mark. We're selling most of our product at around the $7 to $9 mark, and I think that our consumer thinks that that's great value for money.
A perfect Mediterranean climate of a wet winter and dry summer last year has guaranteed a bumper crop this season. Quality is described as excellent. These Traminar grapes should be in the bottle shops within 2 months. Vignerons are now hoping for the continuation of moderate conditions to bring in the crop.
What we're really concerned about is the cyclonic depressions that come in that, dump 10 and 15 inches here. So God willing that won't occur, and you'll have a lot of happy vignerons here in the Hunter.
From the 8 matches contested, the home state picked up 5 titles. The 70 years plus men's event was a lively battle between the Blues and the ACT, with New South Wales just getting up by 4 games with sets locked at 4-all. In the women's, New South Wales continued their outstanding form in the 40-plus division, and with many former touring players in the lineup, went through the team section without dropping a set, defeating Queensland 1 in the final. New South Wales also won the 45-plus and the 65-plus, and in an incredible finish to the 55-plus division, New South Wales and Victoria tied at 4 sets, 36 games apiece, but the Blues were awarded the title on a countback. Queensland won the 40 to 45s, Western Australia the 55 to 60s, and Victoria won the 60-plus women's. The individual competition begins on Monday after the players relax a few weary bones and muscles, legacy of a strenuous week of team competition.
The NRMA report has identified a total of 48 accident black spots on both northern highways, 34 of them on the Pacific Highway and 14 on the New England. However, the black spot locations on the Pacific Highway accounted for some 541 crashes, more than 4 times the crash total of the New England Highway. Number 1 black spot is still O'Sullivan's Gap north of Bulladila, which recorded 44 crashes and 3 fatalities. The next most dangerous area is the winding, heavily timbered stretch near Sapling Creek south of Port Macquarie. Number 3 on the black spot list is a 2-kilometre stretch of highway near Nabiac. The NRMA's General Manager Richard Cox said he applauded work being carried out on both highways, but said much more needs to be done.
This formidable-looking aircraft first blasted into battle in the Korean War. In the early chapters of that conflict, it outgunned and outflew Allied aircraft such as the Mustang, which still relied on World War II fighter technology. Aerial combat was drawn toward a supersonic age, with Meteors, Sabres and Vampires meeting the challenge.
This aircraft was probably the first mass-produced jet fighter with swept wings, which gave it a significant performance advantage over the opponents.
The reputation of the MiG fighter has been perpetuated through the years in films such as Top Gun.
2 MiGs dead ahead, closure 800 miles an hour.
I see him.
Contact time 9 seconds. I'm going to take her down low to avoid an infrared fix.
At just about the same time, a flight of ground attack tornadoes were taking off from there.
Definitely hands-on, all visual dogfighting, closing to an opponent's 6 o'clock area, his tail area, to bring the guns to bear, much as would have been imagined through World War II.
The MiG belongs to Central Coast aircraft collector John Weymouth. It was shipped out from active duty in Poland and has been restored to flying order and battle colours. But now its missions are peaceful. The MiG will take part in air shows around the country.
To the untrained eye, Australian badminton looks to be in a healthy state, but unfortunately that's not the case. As talented as these elite juniors are, they still fall short of the impeccable standards set by the champion Asian nations.
We're way behind them at the top level. But again, they've got such a vast population base to select from that makes it tough for the smaller countries population-wise. But then Sydney, with its population of 4 million, we should be able to do something here.
The problem is a lack of player numbers and intensive training for those who do show talent. The week-long Newcastle camp is giving some of the country's finest juniors a chance to sharpen their skills in an intense, competitive atmosphere. It's an opportunity most rarely receive, but one that must become more common if the game is to prosper down under.
Maybe just the Newcastle area, just the Sydney area, or get together once every, 4 or 5 weeks. And that way we will go forward, playing with the better players. These kids have already improved in the 2.5 days that we've been here.
Lift! Low! Clear! Fire! Lock! Load! Clear! Unload! Clear!
For a century, these streets and houses have been flooded up to 8 times a year. Last April, record king tides forced some families to be evacuated, and many long-time residents decided they'd had enough.
I'm petrified. I'm absolutely petrified.
After squabbles over responsibility, the Water Board finally decided to erect 2 floodgates to stop the water backing up in Throsby Creek to overflow into drains and the streets. The $60,000 project should be finished within 2 weeks. A pump will also be installed to drain rainfall overflow while the gates are closed. But the board has admitted flooding may still occur in times of a heavy downpour.
Glenn Saxon spent today putting the finishing touches on his preparation for the race. The biggest and richest wheelchair event held in Australia, it promises to be even more gruelling than last year's inaugural torture test.
A lot harder. There's sort of big prize money involved in it, and that's why they sort of add in it.
Yeah, of course you got a taste of it last year. Were you a bit surprised at how good the guys from overseas were?
Yeah, they're very fast.
But despite the money and prestige on offer, Glenn is unlikely to lose his cool in the heat of competition. Although he's gunning for a top 20 finish, it's the thrill of competing rather than the final result that matters most.
I think it's just out there to have a good time sort of thing. It's sort of the big race in Australia and it's sort of it's only the second time they've had it. It's a pretty big event. You know, just out there to have fun.
The race will start at the Sydney Opera House at 8:30 on Saturday morning. Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
In the last 12 months, Newcastle and Sydney have been battered by the elements, and with the earth's rumblings has come a growing payout burden for insurance companies. On top of the $100 million damaged from this week's storm in Sydney and on the Central Coast, insurance companies are still paying for the destruction caused by a hailstorm in Sydney last March. That payout figure is expected to top $350 million. But add these figures together and it's just half of what the Insurance Council of Australia estimates will be paid out in Newcastle. Although it's over 12 months since the earthquake devastated the city, nearly 300 claims a week are still being received. All up, 60,000 claims have been lodged, and while estimates place the loss at around $880 million, the final figure could reach $1 billion. Insurance companies admit it's been a difficult year, but refuse to speculate on whether future premiums will reflect the hard times. But like any business, increases in running costs will eventually be passed on to the consumer. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
Newcastle's 30 customs officers have worked from cramped temporary quarters on the harbour side since the earthquake caused serious structural damage to Customs House. At first they hoped to move back into the building, but NBN now believes they'll be relocated to long-term leased premises on Hunter Street. The two most likely spots are the AGL building, now restored after the earthquake, or the MMI building. A lease of up to 3 years is expected to be signed, possibly within days. But this is a disappointment to the Customs Service. What some customs officers fear is that the longer they spend in so-called temporary accommodation, the more opportunity the government has to move them out of their traditional home of the last 100 years for good, leasing out the historic premises to paying tenants. The government's Australian property group spent $500,000 securing and reinforcing the quake-damaged Customs House, but then inexplicably ran out of money. A spokesman for the group said a number of repair options are being considered for budget allocations. Even if work began in 6 months, it could be years before it was completed. Meantime, visitors to Newcastle Harbour foreshore who used to enjoy the sight of the immaculately restored Customs House may choose instead to watch the weeds growing while the government considers its options. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
During the first weeks of operation at the John Hunter, visitors will be greeted with this sign. The hospital will be open next week, but staff are keen to avoid confusion in emergency situations.
The casualty service won't be open until March the 6th. But between now and then, we'll be doing lots of trial runs, trying to iron out any of the difficulties that we might encounter subsequently.
Some of the Hunter's ambulance officers today toured the new facilities, acquainting themselves with hospital procedure. For them, the new ward will make life easier. Patients will be brought to an emergency bay and their condition assessed. They'll then be transported by medical teams to the appropriate area. X-ray, CAT scan and all emergency equipment is located on the same floor, streamlining patient care.
Well, I think it decreases the amount of time it takes to get a patient into the hospital, and from our point of view it keeps our delays to a minimum and gets the ambulances back onto the road.
While there'll be no patients until March, the ward will be a hive of activity as staff make final preparations.
When we're open after March the 6th, this is going to be the most exciting place in which to work, and we will be able to provide for the people of Newcastle services that are equivalent to anywhere in Australia, and in my view will be better.